So back to Evan. Can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of social media in politics?
Yeah,
And
sure.
again,
I mean,
this will be open to the all.
Yeah, I'm sure that anybody here actually could say all this stuff, but I think it actually started kind of interestingly in 2004, actually, with the Dean campaign. I don't know whether you guys remember the Deaniacs, they called them. These people were going crazy for Dean, and it was funny because they were doing something. I actually remember watching C-SPAN, and I saw this hilarious thing where they were cutting back and forth between two campaign events, and one was, I think, Harkin or something, and there was a backyard barbecue, and there were like 10 or 15 people back there, basically with paper plates, kind of slowly walking around, and then they cut to the Dean event, and there were like 2,000 people jumping up and down screaming, And I was like, how in the hell is he doing this? And it turned out that there was this social sort of aspect to what he was doing. They were doing these things called meetups, right? I'm sure you guys all remember this. And they would all show up, and it was like this kind of social sort of event. They would see their friends there, and they would make new friends there. All, in support of Dean, of course. It wasn't just a social scene, but the point is they were there, and there was this whole other kind of a dimension to it, I guess you could say. So fast forward 4 years, you have 2008, and to me, actually, the real story of the Obama situation is not even necessarily Facebook. It's actually that great website that they built, which was a very social kind of thing, right? You could get on that website, you could organize events, you could hook up with your friends, you could ask them to come onto it and stuff like that. So actually, that's what's interesting about that. So that kind of evolved there. And then I think 2 years later, now we have Facebook has kind of evolved into its own sort of capacity as a very powerful platform on its own, a broadcast platform. And it's had all this effect all over the world. As you guys know, you've heard of Arab Spring, all these things that are happening in the Middle East. In Syria right now, their activists are actually getting the word out on Facebook about stuff that's actually happening there because the government's trying to crack down on them and trying to make sure that these stories don't get out. These people being killed, terrible stories, and they're getting out. These stories would never have seen the light of day 5 years ago. And so you have that. You had the Tunisia uprising that was really interesting because although they didn't actually organize on Facebook per se, it started kind of on its own, sort of organically. Facebook turned into this media outlet for that revolution, which is very interesting. They started uploading video and things like that, so they kind of told the world about it through Facebook. So it's kind of to David's point, yeah. So
and Twitter.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure, and Twitter. To David's point, and actually there's a couple other examples too. I should mention the Silvio Berlusconi example. He had 3 different referendums actually recently that he got beaten pretty badly on, and he's like this media titan, basically. He owns, I think, 5 of the major media outlets in Italy, right? So if you control all that media, how does anybody else get a message through? It was widely perceived that his opponents actually did this on Facebook. They still got their message out, and he actually got handed some losses in those referendums. So this is very, very interesting stuff, and to David's point, this does actually kind of keep people honest, I think. For the first time, you actually have these avenues to do this, and that's what's really important right now. And these things have not only affected elections and stuff and uprisings around the world, I actually think they've affected elections in the United States, actually, already. It's just that the stories haven't been fully told yet and stuff like that. You're going to see this more and more and more.
And if I could add to that, and on top of, again, I follow business. Barack Obama's campaign was a perfect example of someone who developed his entire SMS texting and business model. And then at the end of the campaign, and I can't remember his name, I think it's Jeff Bell, or the guy who developed his entire program, did it for both Hillary and Obama, and built an entire company out of it that now handles campaigns for anybody. The fact is, new media exploded and became such a useful, effective tool that he built a multi-million-dollar company by the end of 2008. And I'm actually considering using them, and I'm going to give you a little tidbit. The difference between Obama and Hillary, and when I talk about using it effectively, when we all talk about that, for a little bit more of a fee, her campaign could have captured all the people that signed on. They chose not to pay it. The Obama campaign did. This is business. It's culture, it's life, but it's business, and it is a part of our everyday lives, whether you're a retailer, a political candidate, or just someone who likes to engage in political discussions, or talk about clothing, whatever.
So I'm just going to add 2 cents to that, which is that because the use of digital strategy in politics is still fairly new. Yes, it's been quite a while, but it's still fairly new. A lot of different phenomena get grouped together as though they're the same. So talking about how, say, Obama used Facebook or used his own Maibo site, or talking about how bloggers had particular influence with Ed Lamont in Connecticut, or talking about how an email strategy was particularly effective for some other candidate, or meetups for Howard Dean. It's sort of all this one big clump of new stuff that's sort of in the mix. And one of the challenges that folks like us have is to tease apart that these are different tactics that are employed for different purposes, that have different costs and expertise you need to be able to access, and not everyone can do everything, but being able to give advice about what's appropriate, for this local campaign, for that population, for that kind of a budget, sort of that's the challenge that that folks are dealing with.
The Tea Party movement here in New York was started on a Facebook page with 300 people at City Hall. That was February 27, 2009. On April 15, 2009, according to the unofficial NYPD estimates, we had somewhere north of 12,000, and some estimate by square footage 20,000 people. A lot of it came out of Twitter and Facebook. We have 6,000 dedicated people on Facebook right now, but it's also a matter of the quality of the people and their downline on your Facebook. You can use Clout to check your Twitter, K-L-O-U-T, learn it. It's one of the tools, it tells you your effectiveness. K-L-O-U-T. And what came out of that was suddenly candidates and politicians went, oh wow, it's not just doing it to be cool or to show people I'm involved. They had to start learning. And while they had all the people with the technical knowledge, including mostly younger people, predominantly, they didn't change one simple thing, the culture. The culture is your thought process. It's how you engage people. It's not just something you throw out. Speaker Boehner puts something out, it looks cool. I gotta tell you, he is one of the failures in using Twitter because he doesn't engage his constituents or the nation on the issue. He just puts out news headlines. The fact is, I forget who said earlier, there's so much out there that if all you're putting out is the same headline that 200 other people have put out in those 5 minutes, right, you're lost in the noise.
Right.
What's beginning to happen now is if you want to go on the Republican side of the aisle, they're catching up. And they're doing it by engaging some of those very same companies as the guy who did Obama's and Hillary's SMS text messaging, one of the biggest in the country. But they've done it by engaging and changing how they see it. Think about what is the most important capital that we all have, anyone? One word answer from someone.
Spouse.
That's a smart answer. Is she in the room? All right, better tweet to her and make sure she understands that.
Yeah.
Your brain.
Time to get the word.
Your ability to think and adapt. And in the Bob Turner campaign, which we had talked about, so I'll address that one, that was not a good example of use of social media because that campaign had another angle to it. But in the coming campaigns that are being planned, when you see the primary candidates, they've all been outshone at one time or another by a Sarah Palin tweet because she learned, for better or worse, how to play the Twitter game. She learned how to play the Facebook game better than the others. So combined with her notoriety, it's also that people know that when she puts something up, it will be provocative. Again, I go back to credibility. If you put up garbage, you can lose in minutes thousands of people or key people. You lose them whether they leave your list or not because they don't come back to you. And that's where you really start losing effectiveness. But the candidates are getting smarter because they've changed their minds. And the fact is they're asking questions of their staffers. Their staffers, frankly, are smarter than most of them on both sides. I'm going to throw that one out for everybody.
I'm just going to jump in with some classic examples. The first would be if you're trying to calculate this horrible phrase, return on investment of digital tools and social media. So one answer would be, so how many votes is that going to get you? And it's an incorrect way of looking at it, because a better one is, how many votes could you lose if your staff don't know how to respond in real time? And the answer is quite large. The second sort of mental exercise would be to think about, if we replace the word social media with the word talking. So does your campaign use talking? Does your campaign use communication? Well, since all these tools are integrated, you can't really do without it. It's sort of like imagining that there would one day be a special campaign strategy involving telephones. Well, no, actually telephones are just part of the background of how we lead our lives. They're not that special. Right now, social media looks special, but it isn't really. It's just becoming woven into everything we do. Another great example is there's 2 campaign candidate training events that I know of, and I'm not going to name them to sort of save them the embarrassment, but I'll give you a hint. They're on the liberal side. One of them did a week-long extensive training for campaign managers who then went on to staff a bunch of campaigns. They never taught them how to use the online properties. They didn't teach them how to update websites. They didn't teach them how to do Facebook profiles. They didn't teach them how to use constituent relationship management tools. They just didn't teach it. And then when the campaign managers got to the offices they're going to work out of, they're sort of like, well, who knows how to do this? Who's supposed to do that? And it was just totally sidelined. The second is an out-of-town outfit came and did a training for campaign managers. They had one session out of 2 days on online campaigning, but only a third of the people got to attend it. And when I asked them, why, is that really an appropriate estimation of the importance of these tools? The answer was, well, people who run campaigns can only do so much, so whatever's online, we just sort of fall under the job of the press secretary, which is a very bad answer, because press secretaries, the good ones, are going to properly focus on the wrong things if they're in charge of social media. Message control is very important for your press person. It's the wrong thing to be emphasizing if you want to do social media right. And there's a laundry list of mistakes that are being made because of a refusal to sort of see this discipline as something where if you don't actually know what you're doing, you're going to end up doing it the wrong way.
If I could add to that, because sometimes I get so busy, I forget what I did yesterday. I went to sleep, very short time. Yesterday, to go to that, in 14 states, there was a nationwide training bomb done by myself and American Majority in a partnership. They're a nonpartisan group that trains activists. And by the way, in attendance here in New York were independents, libertarians, Democrats, Tea Partiers, non-Tea Partiers. And I think my oldest person in the room, and I'll be nice, not to give her age away or who, was about 84 years old. Someone who doesn't use email, but as of yesterday, is going on Twitter because her phone's capable. And there were probably a couple of 18 and 19-year-olds or 20-something-year-olds in there. I did a broadcast from it. I did my show from it for a very significant purpose. I wanted people to hear about the engagement. So I talked to people from around the country about what they were doing at their trainings. And I mean from Heartland, Vermont, talk about going up into Dean territory and Bernie Sanders territory, to Scottsdale, Arizona, to Loveland, Colorado areas. 14 states yesterday. Suddenly there was a mixture of people of all parties, no parties, and age groups that were being taught social media. In this training, we are teaching people the basics of getting on Twitter,
That's awesome.
on Facebook, on all these other tools, mostly it's Twitter and Facebook, let's face it, especially in the activist realm. But all the other tools are being rolled out, and this curriculum is something that I intend to repeat in New York about every 6 to 8 weeks, and it is a developed curriculum. It's not people getting up here with even respect to ourselves and telling you what we do. It's classroom, and it was done right down the street at Baruch. So this has to be taught as well. And when an 84-year-old woman who doesn't use email, who called me, and I talked to her 24 hours before that, says, I'm going to be on Twitter by the time I walk out of here. By the way, I'm going to have to meet with her and have lunch with her and sit down, and so will a friend of hers. It tells you something. It's no longer limited. I mentioned in our conference call about this panel that traditional, I do a lot of marketing for radio and different companies and products. Traditionally, they polled 45 years and younger up till about a year and a half ago when they did any polling on social media. They've now expanded the demographic and started doing more targeted polling. Why? Because of people like that 84-year-old, because of senior centers where there's a computer that's available, because of in a maybe less in an underprivileged area, there are programs and community programs that give people access to computers to look for a job, to do whatever. Frankly, companies Twitter jobs. Walmart uses it, Kmart uses it, all levels of companies, Citicorp, CIT, they put it out. So it's very important, again, to continue to see that this development is not going to end.
Gina, the largest growing demographic of online daters is the over 55 crowd.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to just share a personal experience. I've been on a number of campaigns, and generally I'll end up doing communications as part of my job, whether that's web, Twitter, Facebook, Foursquare, Flickr, you name it. And time and time again, I find myself fighting with the campaign because they're saying, we need you to write this policy position, or I need you on the phone with this newspaper. And day in, day out, the compromise I've always worked out is I abuse Hootsuite. I abuse it like nobody's business. It allows you to schedule your tweets. So I'm sitting there, I know what my candidate's doing every hour of the day. 24/7, I use Google Calendar, and it's better than putting a chip in the back of their head. So what I've got there is I know at 7 a.m. he's going to be at a subway station handing out pamphlets. So I will sit there and I will sit down with an intern and have the intern write out 100 different proposed tweets. And the only backfire is to always make sure that when your candidate feels like not waking up that morning, you make sure you cancel that tweet before it goes out. Otherwise, people realize that it's less authentic than they thought it was. But that being said, Charles, you asked a question that kind of previewed this panel. What is a digital strategist, and what is their plight on campaigns?
Where do you start?
Well, first of all, I'll say that when I looked up digital strategist in Wikipedia, that Bible of true facts, I found a definition that really applied to the corporate world. And I think that there's a certain logic there. Corporations do social media, they do digital strategy better than nonprofits and most political operatives. There's a lot of stuff to do online. And we might actually take a few minutes here to sort of just figure out what that is. Now, we've already mentioned social media, but what would be something else that one must do online?
Don't post pictures of yourself.
Yeah.
That's the don't do. Let's what are the fields
Don't
of
post the wrong pictures. Yeah.
What's a thing you need to do if you're going to do politics online? You have to do fundraising, and especially small dollar fundraising. What's something else?
Branding.
What's that?
Branding. Branding.
Branding. You have to do branding. Although I'm going to say online branding, it's probably very similar to sort of branding in general. What is the specifically online stuff that you might need to do if you're working on a campaign? Distributing your information out to elite audiences. That's what I would call that. The press aren't as important as they used to be. But I'm gonna help out and just be like online video, online advertising on different platforms, being able to blog appropriately in different blogs, developing blogger relationships with people who are influential in your communities, having an A-blogger relationship, because A-list bloggers are not the same as the ones that are talking about new food restaurants in Brooklyn.
But some of those are very important.
Some of them are very important. You could make sustainable food part of your campaign message. What about, this is the biggie, is the CRM, and I know that's gobbledygook. The software that you use to send out emails, to solicit money online, to track people's responsiveness to what you're asking them to do, sort of managing that CRM is an essential part of any campaign. There are basically no campaigns that don't have a CRM, even though you have many candidates who find out what a CRM is for the first time after they get one. There's field reporting tools. There's tools that help you. There's the voter file enhancement tools that everyone is using now. There are mobile campaign tools to manage your SMS messages and to send out shortcodes to people. And I won't belabor the point. I have this long list that I was going to have you come up with. But the point is there's all these different things that need to be taken into account. And for those of you who hear the previous session, when we asked the folks that are doing campaign consulting, are you the person that a candidate would turn to for advice? None of them said yes. And that to me is sort of like an indication of like where we are in New York City at this time. The truth is that they aren't. They were honest about that. But more importantly, they don't necessarily know someone who is, and many will make the mistake of assuming that a young person who is simply active individually on one of these media, or who specializes in 5 out of these 30 categories, oh, they'll be my expert. They're not necessarily the expert, although they might be. And if they were an expert, why are they just lowly staff? I mean, if they actually know this stuff inside and out and are qualified to give you advice, shouldn't they have a name and people would know to ask that person? So that's actually the way it is in DC, where we know names of people who are digital strategists and they work for Obama or the White House or for Apple Computers, or we know that. In New York City, what you have is a culture of political consultants where they treat sort of this whole field as this thing that is only relevant for national politics, or this thing that is, okay, if there's a volunteer, they'll manage the social media account, they'll send out tweets now and then, but they don't actually have this list of all these different things that need to be coordinated. And just to think about what the value of having this in hand, think about the job they did on the Working Families Party, where a newspaper that in the grand scheme of things does not have a large audience was able to hound those folks for 8 to 12 months over allegations of corruption that were unproven, but had devastating impact because that party they weren't set up to actually respond to the public. And that meant that if you were a fan of the party, you felt that they did not do the things they were accused of, you didn't have what to repeat. You didn't have what to say. You didn't have people reminding you how to fight their battle in online space as it was going on. And the second sort of big example from that time was the job done on Acorn. Say what you will about Acorn being right or wrong, there's one thing we know, which is it took them forever to respond. And when they did respond, they did it by spending a ton of money on DC lobbyists who went from door to door in Congress saying, please don't take our money away.
They did.
And it didn't work.
That's right.
Because the people that had, the folks in Congress who were their allies were saying, yes, but that's not where the conversation is. And Acorn wasn't able to drive the conversation properly. So I'm just saying a digital strategist is that person who can sort of handle that suite of tools. They're not the expert in all of them, but they know who is. And they can give you advice about where to spend your resources and priorities.
Just weave it in so that we can take Q&A.
I'm going to add just a brief bridge to that, if I may.
Ahmed from Manhattan Young Dems, you've been collecting questions, so we'll ask you to bring them up after this comment from David.
Right. Let's go back to the bridge that does need to exist between new media and traditional media. That's very important because the reality is, as you said, the response, the tactics, and the institution hasn't changed that much. That's where they are making some advance, and it's something you also have to realize has to exist. The fact is, the big companies, the cable television, the newspapers, they're not going away, but they can be used to cross over effectively. And one of the ways they do that, I call it piggybacking. And one tweet just came in, which is a perfect example of that. Now, Wycliffe Jean and Sarah Palin, you'd think would never be two people in the same tweet. But he came out a few days ago and said that whether it's not a matter of even liking her, he just liked what she had in effect. And since he has been tweeting her, and now they're retweeting and retweeting, his Twitter traffic has put somebody who was not in the news for anything since Haiti, or his last questionable issue, right at the top. So you've got to keep those bridges going and take advantage of them.
If I could just make one quick comment about, actually, Charles was saying some really interesting things, and I think they're all true, and I think it kind of has to be kind of reinforced. I think a lot of times the current political culture kind of sees social media as a kind of add-on or something, or like something that you just kind of throw at a kid to do or something like that. And the truth is that that's not true. It's got to be handled very, very carefully. And it is about message, and it's about staying consistent with the campaign. And it's about, as David said, it's about being authentic. It's about being good. I think part of the reason is that they just haven't seen the impact on it yet. Maybe personally, locally, I'm not sure. But I mean, I'm here to tell you that it does have an impact. I got told the same things on a parliamentary race that I worked on in London. I had this idea to pull in sort of the younger voters and stuff onto Facebook and start talking to them, things like that. They all said the same thing. They said, well, they don't vote. It's not going to work. But yeah, cool. Try it and see what happens. So over 6 months or so, I did this. I actually had time to set it up and do it. And on election day, the two loudest skeptics in that office were very quiet because there were all these messages coming in from these kids saying, I just voted for you today. And some of these kids were things, there were people who, if you went to their Facebook page under political persuasion, it said things like, I hate politics, I hate politicians, you know what I mean? And yet, actually, there was one tweet which is great. It was a Facebook message, actually. It's a screenshot in a presentation that we have now. This kid said, you did answer my question 3 months ago about the road conditions, and so I'm voting for you. So to me, that was kind of a nutshell version of the fact that this does work. And I think if you just try the outreach actually to begin with, you will see results. I mean, it's not a fantasy. It's like, you kind of have to build it and they will come kind of thing, but you have to do it. And if you don't do it, or if you just do it on a perfunctory level, don't expect to see a lot of results. I mean, if it's just a perfunctory effort, you can't really then just suddenly turn around and say, see, it doesn't work or something. You really got to put time into it.
Just going to add something about at the last session, there was someone who said something that there's a tendency in any political system towards oligarchy, and that it will want to perpetuate itself. There's a reason why I'm sitting here with David, feeling really proud to be here with him, even though we may disagree on, taxes or whatever. But here's the deal. Social media, digital tools can help disrupt silos, help disrupt pyramid structures where there's a lot of power concentrated at the top. That's true for business, where new products and services can sort of advance very fast and take over their rivals. It's true for media, where networks that were once in charge of everything now have to sort of take into account that they're no longer alone in the universe. And it includes parties and political structures where there's a certain comfort level. Isn't it great that like just us folks are in charge and we can decide who gets to run and how they get to run and what goes on? And social media opens that up. And I would like to think, I'm sort of a little bit of a techno-utopian, I like to think that the advance of these tools that politicians will use to advance selfishly, to get what they want out of it, have the inadvertent consequence of opening up the political field to issues that transcend party labels and ideology, to help unite people who might not otherwise be together. They help introduce new players into the political scene. They help give prominence to people, whether it's Joe the plumber or whoever else, who might not otherwise have been heard. And that opening up effect is profoundly democratic. And in that sense, regardless of who wins or who comes out on top in 5 years, 10 years, I'm sort of proud to be part of a system that draws in more voices and lets more people be gatekeepers together.
You're here.